Why does work tire us and video games energize us? They both use high focus and concentration. After about a decade of being a video game developer, I learned why. I looked into the neuroscience and I found out most lazy people aren't actually lazy. They're highly motivated and they don't even realize it. In fact, there's a way you can make any difficult subject feel like a video game, where it's easy, you don't procrastinate, you have higher focus and energy levels. My name is Drew, here to help you with your purpose, get past procrastination, and to follow your passion. Now, what we'll realize is that it's possible to be motivated to do any subject, to have higher energy levels and higher focus. We know this because when we look at video games and video game addiction, you'll see that there are people who can play for about 8 hours plus and have complete motivation to continue going. They don't have the general symptoms of brain fog or fatigue or even laziness that we typically see within work. So, what is the difference between video games and work, and how can we utilize this in our day-to-day life? And this comes down into the structure of how things are developed and how we perceive these subjects. You'll notice that within any of the top sold video games of all time, there's no specific genre or character arc or story that these games have to follow in order to become the best of the best. They're all highly diverse. From Grand Theft Auto to Minecraft, there's no real similarity besides the structure within. From a video game developer's perspective, the thing that they care most about is actually the iteration and perfecting the structure. The things that game developers actually test first before publishing a game is how fun can they make this game while being completely bare bones. That means no particle effects, no storyline, no real anything that causes high dopamine spikes in the brain. Now, without this high dopamine spikes, that means the structure of the game itself must be addicting to some form. Now, that is a part that we need to implement into our day-to-day life. In order to do this, we need to first talk about the dAcc. It's a part of the brain that video games have mastered. The dAcc is essentially the effort to reward bias in the brain. Anytime we want to do an activity, before we even do it, our brain calculates what the effort of this activity is, what the value proposition, and the reward that we're going to get from it. It kind of thinks about the likeliness of the reward, how important it is to us, what our belief systems say about the reward, and also what we believe about the difficulty of the task before we even do it. Now, this is going to cause us to have physiological effects, the typical emotions that you feel before we even do the activity. You've noticed that if you've ever thought about even, cleaning the house, sometimes you'll feel really tired or lethargic. If you want to work on a big project, it feels very overwhelming and like you don't want to do it. This isn't laziness. This is a part of your brain giving you signals saying that this isn't worth it. And the main reason why that it doesn't feel worth it is because you haven't clarified the structure of this thing enough. Something that video games are very good at doing. And I'm going to explain to you the exact step-by-step process of what we should do about this in a minute. The dAcc isn't the only part of the brain that determines our motivational levels. A lot of it comes down to dopamine and what is called dopamine reinforcement. In order to best explain dopamine reinforcement, I first got to teach you a little lesson on some neuroscience about how dopamine works in the brain. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, meaning that it kind of gets released to certain parts of the brain, sometimes for protein synthesis, or sometimes even for actions that we want to do. This is typically the leading indicator of what motivates us, and what stops our motivation is if our dopamine tolerances are low. So it all starts at this one little point here, which we would say is our starting position. As you anticipate a task or thinking about doing something, dopamine will rise from this position. I want you to think about if you want to go make a sandwich, you start to imagine what the sandwich would taste like, how you would feel after eating the sandwich, and all the yumminess that it would bring you. Our dopamine starts to rise. And then, as our dopamine rises, we hit a point which we call the peak. Now, the peak is very important because this is typically what causes an action. This is the moment that after you're done thinking about how good a sandwich is going to be, you've determined that you want to go make it. And so your dopamine peaks and you go set off and do the action. Now, as we take the action, we start building the sandwich, we're in the kitchen looking for the mayonnaise and the bread and all these different parts, our dopamine starts to drop. At which point, our dopamine is going to go into what we call a trough. It goes below baseline. Now, baseline is very important because this is what determines dopamine reinforcement. So what our dopamine baseline essentially is, it is what causes us to feel normal. If our dopamine levels are at baseline, we feel completely fine. We're not super excited or energetic, but we're also not tired or sleepy. Anytime our dopamine levels are above baseline, we feel amazing. We feel hyper excited and we want to take action. Anytime we're below baseline, we will feel lethargic and tired. Okay. So as we take the action, we start making the sandwich, eventually our dopamine goes below baseline. Now, why this is important is because this determines what is called dopamine reinforcement. After we've done an activity, our brain needs to determine if that activity was worth doing or not, how our actions affected the outcome that we got. So we think about a sandwich, we think about how good was the sandwich. If the sandwich was how we expected, it was normal, tasty, our dopamine levels naturally go back to baseline. And if the sandwich was better than we thought, we got like a bag of chips with it, it tasted delicious, everything went perfectly fine, our dopamine levels go above baseline. Now, if the sandwich was burnt and we didn't have the right ingredients and the lettuce was wilty, our dopamine levels actually stay below baseline. At which point, we typically think like we're mad at ourselves because we burnt the bread, we did all these things. But it's not always that you're actually just frustrated. It's because your dopamine levels stayed below baseline, meaning that you had a negative dopamine reinforcement. Now, this is a simplified version, and your dopamine tolerances, how long you stay above baseline, how long you stay below baseline, is all built upon expectation and difficulty of the task. Something that maybe we'll talk about in another conversation. Which reminds me, if you want to have more conversations with me, make sure to subscribe. Video games use this dopamine cycle and reinforcement in a very particular way. And it's not through the normal means that you think of when we talk about the particle effects or the explosions or, these normal characteristics of what you would think would spike your dopamine. In fact, they use it in a way of what is built into the structure of the game. By structuring the game a certain way, it funnels you to continuously, every moment, have a positive dopamine reinforcement. Dopamine reinforcement causes you to want to do the same action or be compelled or motivated to do that activity once again. Dopamine, and the entire reason we have dopamine reinforcement, was a survivalistic thing to tell us if our actions were beneficial to our survival or negative. This is partly and mostly what creates our motivational levels. There's a game I really like called Apex Legends. You've never had to play it to understand what I'm about to explain to you. Apex Legends is a simple shooter game. You get about 20 teams with 3 people each, and they drop into a map. It's a big arena, and as time goes on, the arena shrinks smaller and smaller, and you try to become the best of the best, the king of the hill where you're the last one standing. And the game forces somebody to guarantee win. Some people like the games because of the weapons, or the characters, or the dialogue, or the story, which is all good. It's a supporting part of the structure. But the main reason a game like this is so good is because it plays on multiple levels of your innate desires. The main thing that really causes a lot of motivation is called structure and expectations. So an easy definition of the structure I'm talking about is simply having a starting position and a stopping position. And expectations is the difficulty of this task. When you combine these in a multiplicative kind of equation, you will start to easily see what causes us to be motivated. Video games have a very simple structure and expectation setup. No matter what game we're talking about, if it's a good game, at least, it's going to have a very simple structure to it. This is also called something the Zinglick effect. I'm not sure how to actually fully pronounce that, but it's an effect that happens within the brain that causes it. So when you start an activity, your brain needs some sort of resolution. It needs to finish something. This causes a level of almost like an addictive property for our motivation. If you start something, you need to have a solidified end position, which is why I initially brought up the dAcc. The dAcc is very important because a part of its processing develops because it needs to understand the estimated value of the activity. It needs to understand the difficulty. And so if we don't have a very clearly defined structure, meaning an endpoint, your brain just assumes that something is going to be very difficult, it's going to last a lot longer than you thought, and that there are unknown variables that are going to play into the activity. Such as if you say, I'm just going to go on a walk, well, what does that really mean to your brain? If you don't have an ending position, such as saying, I'm going to go on a walk for 10 minutes, go on a walk for 1 mile, or go on a walk until I have some sort of idea or burn a certain amount of calories, that ending position helps solidify the expectations or structure of how much effort we're going to have to put into the task. Expectation might be more important than the entire structure of something because expectation manipulates what is the end point for our objective. Sometimes, if I expect to make something that is, quote, perfect, or especially how it's perceived as perfect, my brain goes, well, there's a lot of variables that determine what is perfect. During this conversation, I had to develop the introduction, how I framed it, what information I brought up. I had to figure out and structure the rest of the information. The neuroscience had to double check to see if it was factually correct, if I'm pronunciating things right, what I'm going to say next. All these different things that I'm generally estimating that will create all these variables had to be perfectly in place in order to create something that I would deem as decent enough or close to perfect enough that I also expect is going to be perceived as good enough. You see, the more variables that we introduce, the more things the brain has to try to predict and say that, hey, all these variables are probably aligned with each other in a good enough way for me to continue with this project. The same goes with like if I'm making a website. So if you break down the website in every individual variable, the font, the colors, the information, I have to determine if my header is good enough, if the introductory part's good enough, if the description, the product itself, the photos of the product, the color scheme, all these things. We end up with a few thousand variables. Now my brain has to put all these variables into a little package and say, yeah, this meets my expectation. Especially if your expectation is so vague, like this is a good enough website that's going to have a good click-through rate. You're changing all these variables and trying to get a vague outcome. Your brain hates calculating this way. Your brain doesn't want to do it. And that's why people become demotivated. Because for one, they probably don't have the self-mastery or self-effectivity that is going to cause them to be motivated in the first place. Your brain is saying that there's a lot of variables at play, which creates unclear outcomes. And then with these unclear outcomes, are we even going to be able to meet our expectations of something being, quote, good enough? So I want to give you an alternative route for how we should be living life. Maybe not should, I'm not going to force anything on you, but I want you to start creating more structure and clear defined expectations. One example that I thought was pretty interesting, let's say we're going on a run to increase our discipline levels. This is something that I see a lot of people try to do when it comes like going to the gym or trying to work on a business. They're doing it so they can grind, so they can work really hard. But is this a good way of motivation? And I'm going to say no. It's about like a 3 out of 10 for me. The reason why is because there's no set rule set of what the structure is. There's not really an ending position. What really defines building your discipline? Like you do something hard, but then how much longer do you do it? How much more does that actually build your discipline? How much more are you willing to grind for something that you can't even physically see an outcome of? So not only is there a bad structure, there's no actual set ending point because you can't define building discipline as an ending point. It's very vague. You also don't know how much you value building your discipline. You see, there's a chance that your brain is going to lie to you. Your brain is just going to start saying to yourself, oh, this grind is good enough, or that the run isn't even building the discipline in the first place, even if it technically is. Or some sort of arbitrary argument against the activity you're doing in the first place, because there's no actual physical thing that is representing success. All these things, the lack of structure, the lack of value proposition, the lack of having something physically to determine when you're going to end the activity is going to cause a demise. Not only when you're doing the activity, but also think about before doing the activity. What I think is more interesting is that when you do an activity like this, like I'm going to go run to be more disciplined, I'm going to diet to be more disciplined, I'm going to do this thing just to grind more, is that you have a chance of failure because of the lack of structure. Now, what's weird is that once you've failed once, you get negative dopamine reinforcement. And what this ends up doing is causing your brain to say, this activity was not worth doing. And so next time you try to do that activity, you're not going to be motivated because your brain is signaling low dopamine levels, saying that you're not going to want to do an activity. Something else when it comes to either clearing your mind or trying to create a creative idea for a business or trying to think of how you could design your product page, all things that I've personally gone through when it comes to going on a walk, is that these are things that you don't necessarily super control. Coming up with new innovative ideas, although it comes from your own brain, you're not necessarily guaranteed to come up with a new idea every single time you go on a walk. Maybe you have a high likeliness, but you're not guaranteed. And so the one time that you fail to come up with a cool idea or come up with some artwork, that time is going to cause negative reinforcement, which will only perpetuate a chance that you're going to have lower motivation the next time you try to do a task. So I want you to start to think how many variables are playing into what I perceive as the outcome. Going on a walk for 20 minutes only has one variable: time itself. We're talking about 20 minutes and that's it. When we talk about playing video games eliminate outside variables that manipulate our mind's mental calculations. There's only so many other players in a battle royale game. When you drop in and the arena shrinks, that arena shrinks at a set time. Another little hint about how video games work so well is because the actions you take in a video game are caused by you. And you'll notice in a video game, the win and lose variables are almost always guaranteed to be had because of your actions, which is something we don't see a lot in the real world. If you are very successful in your career, well, that comes down to other people's perception of you. It comes down to their mood that day, if you get the promotion or not necessarily your actions. But in a video game, if you beat somebody in a fight or you find the diamonds, it's because you took the action. You spent enough time grinding. You spent enough time developing your skills. Actions that you took caused the dopamine reinforcement. The dopamine cycle is really only caused because of actions that you personally take. One of the biggest things that cause video games to make people addicted and motivated to play them is because they use intrinsic motivators instead of extrinsic motivators. In the real world, I want you to ask yourself, what motivates you? And a lot of times people say the car, the house, the relationship, the well-being, the body. All these things are what we call extrinsic motivators because they're parts of the outside world. And so intrinsic motivators are things such as freedom, growth, mastery, and development. When it comes to the real world, developing a business might take 10 years. But in a video game, to become a master at the video game, it might take like a month or two. And you can noticeably see results within just one day of practice. You go into a firing range and you practice your mouse movements or your controller movements and your targeting, maybe your mechanical movements like sliding or jumping or some sort of part of the video game that is unique to it. These parts that you can master or develop are intrinsic motivators. In soccer or football, whatever you want to call it, what other variables are there? You just have to get the ball into the goal. That's all you have to do. There's not caring about 1,000 different variables. Just get the ball into the goal. That's all you got to do. Or stop the ball from getting into your goal. In video games, it's the same thing. You just do what is the objective without 1,000 variables. And you can become a master at this exact program. There's a structure, and you can get point A to point B better and better and better. Your skill can develop from that very thing. But in the external world, trying to work on a business, you have to worry about other people's opinions about your product, your page, your videos, your content that you're producing out there. That is difficult in order to become motivated at. Even schoolwork sometimes comes down to the perception of your professor. So the more that you can correlate the actions you do to a more solidified outcome, the better it's going to be for your motivation because it has better dopamine reinforcement and it's an intrinsic motivator. An example would be walking to burn 100 calories. That's an action that you take and only you can take to receive a very specific goal. One thing I want to leave you with that is very tangible and will actually probably really help you is that look at the things that you really like in life, that you're addicted to. If it's video games or sports or running a business and you want to transfer that motivation to a different topic, look at why you like that thing in the first place. If it's video games, look at the type of video game you like playing. Is it a creative game? Is it a sandbox game? Is it a game you play with friends? Or is it a strategic shooter game? Look at the main things that you play that game for and implement this into the rest of your life. For me, I love strategic games and I love shooter games. One reason why is because the communication and also the skill barrier. I know I can become developed in a high skill game. And this makes it so I get praise from my friends and I can become the best of the best at this thing. I know now, because of the games I play, what I should be aiming for when it comes to my business. Instead of trying to be a nice, creative, fluffy business, maybe I should just become the best of the best in one niche subject. If you like playing games because of the creativeness and the building aspect, or when you're trying to move this into starting a business or going to the gym, try to do things that are more creative then. Try to explore more. Try to use more artistic views instead of strategic views. If you play games because you love playing with your friends, then you need to have a community with whatever other subject you're trying to move into. If it's like going to the gym, maybe get into rock climbing, because rock climbing, it's super easy to have a community. You go there, no one's wearing headphones, everybody talks to each other, and you can have a community. While going to a traditional gym, everybody's wearing headphones, they're all doing their own thing. You don't really want to approach too many people. So if you like community, try to move that thing that you like into other subjects of your life. I hope with all this being said, you learned something, you liked our conversation, and I hope you'll watch some of the other conversations I have with you. See you.